3 Days of the Condo is the 11th episode of the 4th season of Frasier. This is directed by David Lee, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode. And it's definitely one that I really enjoyed. I feel one part of the narrative felt a little bit flat, like they could have done a little bit more with it, but in general, it's a really good episode. So I will go through things chronologically and share some thoughts along the way. And it starts off with Martin and Sherry waiting for Daphne to leave, and then they start to enjoy some alone time, and then Eddie comes along and gets in the way, which is pretty accurate. And then Daphne actually comes back in with Niles and Frasier, who had been antiquing, and they brought some takeout, so Daphne didn't need to go shopping for dinner. And Frasier has bought an antique door knocker, and he's very excited about this. He puts it on the doors. Well, not necessarily straight away. He first of all has to find out how to do that, and then he has to locate the tools before he can do that. And Niles then agrees to let Martin make dinner at his place for Martin and Sherry while Niles is out, which is lovely. That's a nice thing for him to do. And this is the part that feels really underdeveloped. I'll basically wrap it up here, and then we'll get in with the main narrative. Later on in the episode, Niles and Frasier are in an elevator, and Niles mentions that he went into the apartment and accidentally saw Martin and Sherry being intimate. And apart from an awkward moment between Niles and Martin, that's basically it. And it feels like they could have done a little bit more with that. I'm not entirely sure where they would have got the time from, but I feel like it took up such a small amount of time in the episode that it was probably better, in my opinion, to just not include it. Maybe save that for another episode. It doesn't have to be that detailed. It just seems really underdeveloped and really unnecessary, and I didn't really get much out of it. So as my only real point of criticism, that part either needed to be a little bit better, we needed to get a little bit more out of it, or not include it at all. But the rest of it, absolutely perfect. Frasier almost immediately gets a sticky note on his door knocker, and this note is from Miss Langer. She's played by Dana Ivey, and Frasier is not happy about the fact that he needs to take the door knocker off, but at the same time he does admit that he completely forgot that he's supposed to submit an application to the condo board. And I guess it makes sense. It seems quite strict, but it's to stop people putting up really tacky decorations and things, which it seems harsh, but I understand it. So Frasier decides to go down to the condo board to try and appeal to their better nature to get them to agree to the door knocker. And because Miss Langer is in charge and she's not a very nice person, she says no immediately. And Frasier had actually given this convincing, although slightly far-fetched, speech about the benefit of the door knocker. It didn't work, and he ends up calling her a tyrant, saying she's more concerned with power than justice, which absolutely seems to be the case. And everybody at the meeting applauded, and it was almost triumphant. Frasier forgot his briefcase, came back into the room, collected his briefcase, and spilled the briefcase's guts all over the floor. So not his finest moment, but in general, the applause definitely went well for him. He is then in the car park, and he's greeted by a friend. And it's very mysterious. We don't get to see this person too closely. They're not willing to reveal their identity, actually because they're currently redoing their bathroom and they don't want Ms. Langer to not approve their bidet. And this person actually tells Frasier that everybody thinks Frasier should run against Ms. Langer at the upcoming elections for the condo board. And Frasier thinks on this a little bit, and Ross is actually at the apartment. This is the time when Niles comes up in the elevator and mentions that he saw Martin and Sherry, and we find out that Miss Langer had actually made Daphne walk several blocks because she's no longer allowed to park in the space she's been parking in for years. And Eddie got a little slip of paper telling him he's not allowed in the main elevator. He's supposed to go in the freight elevator, which is ridiculous. And Frasier decides, let's do this. And he heads down to the board, and it seems like things might go well, but we find out, as Daphne finds out, that one of the slips of paper that they received recently wasn't about Eddie being in the elevator. It was actually because Martin had been caught in the hot tub without his swimming trunks on. There is a reason for it. Martin gives us the backstory. it makes sense, I guess. And he wasn't just in there naked for the sake of it. And then Frasier, unaware of this, goes down to the board for the elections, and he's giving this speech, and it's so well written. And he's talking about how it's Martin's little friend. Of course, he thinks he's talking about Eddie, and that, of course, he's named it. And Frasier says something to the effect of, well, Eddie wouldn't have been my name of choice. I might have called it something like Puck, which I have to say is a brilliant name. I think Puck is... I love Puck as a character. Puck, of course, from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I think it rather suits Eddie. He's better as an Eddie, but Puck is a pretty cute name. And it also maybe suggests that maybe Frasier had thought about that. Maybe he had thought about Eddie. And I think that that's quite sweet. And Daphne arrives a little too late. Frasier has already done a lot of damage. He's already said a lot of things that aren't coming across very well. And then Frasier finally finds out the truth, and that's the end of that. And then we end with Daphne in the elevator with Miss Langer in front of her, and brilliant camera angle, beautifully shot. And we see her about to whack her on the head with a baguette, and then she ends up eating it instead. But a nice way to end things. It's a great episode. I found it to be very funny, very well written. The only thing that I don't think worked very well was the story with Niles and discovering Martin and Sherry. I feel like it either needed to be a little bit more or not in there at all, because it just felt really underdeveloped. But that aside, I thought it's a brilliant episode, very funny. 3 Days of the Condo is ultimately definitely a very entertaining episode of Frasier.